This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Lee Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We keep things rolling along while the NBA playoffs is going down. Shaw and I are out there examining all of the bodies being laid out. You know, there's only going to be one team left standing. The rest of them are going to be laid to rest. So we got to take that time out for us to be able to look at them, examine them, figure out what went down. How did they die their untimely death? And coveted autopsy reports. So it's a great opportunity to have those conversations with the teams that weren't quite good enough to get to the final stage of the coveted NBA finals to at least have a chance to hoist that title. Let me go and run the red carpet to my right-hand man. It's www.sharpsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My man, Mr. Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw, man? You know, we were working overtime. We threw three bodies on the slab. This time we're back to our regularly scheduled maintenance, so to speak. This time we're only going to examine two this week.
Two Western Conference teams that, probably one, obviously hope they could be moving on further. One just kind of happy to be there. Didn't have the season they expected still, nonetheless. But yeah, man, we appreciate the NBA for allowing us to kind of get back to a regular scheduled program here. 3 is a lot, but 2 is, what we can manage. And I'm sure what our fans, listeners are ready and kind of accustomed to as well, too. So get back to business as usual out here, as the EPMD would say.
Yeah, man, we can't put that many bodies out there. We start considering it like, you know what I'm saying? Like the people are going to start worrying about this. It's like, oh, this is not a good thing, right? Laying out all these bodies. But no, we actually enjoy the opportunity of having these conversations and doing our autopsy reports. And it's kind of like a heat check, so to speak, for, hey, let's not forget about the teams that didn't quite make it. And even the teams, even if they got ousted in the playoffs, how things ended and the way things ended for some of these teams, I think allows us to kind of put a marker in the road to see about what possible moves or, what decisions may have to be made. And it also gives us an opportunity, Shaw, for us to even speak specifically about the players that are in line of sight, about the future being dictated for the organizations that they play for, and I think that in and of itself is great conversation, great talk for us to be able to use that opportunity for us to even get people more enthused about the upcoming NBA season, even while they're enjoying what they're getting from the current NBA playoffs.
Yeah, very well said. And I think one of the teams is going to be they incite a lot of emotions about who they are, what they are, where they're going, and whether or not they should just pack it up and give up. So a lot of controversial statements made about, one LA team, which I think everybody knows who that is going to be. So a lot of great conversation to be had here in this week's episode, man. This is going to be a fun autopsy, to say the least.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you've kind of leaked the information out for us, Shaw. Two teams that we'll be discussing for our coveted autopsy reports. We'll be discussing about the Los Angeles Clippers, and then we'll also focus our attention on the Minnesota Timberwolves. So as always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. If you want to catch this episode and also the previous episodes of our coveted autopsy reports, be sure to go to www.thebaselinenba.com so you can catch it and download. And, listen, man, we're always around. We're always, on point with our discussions regarding stuff happening in regards to the landscape of the NBA. But this autopsy reports, man, we just always have a great time. So you don't want to miss out on some of the previous episodes that we've laid out for you. I think it's really good content for your listening pleasure. If you're listening or if you're watching us on YouTube or any of the other visual video / platform channels, hello. If you see the light blue symbol logo down at the bottom, that's 19 Media Group. A Baseline family be rocking with the 19 Media Group. 19 Media Group be running these content streets. So be sure to go to www.19mediagroup.com so you can check our show and also the family of great shows of content that's out there. We have just got a great plethora of talented people who just deliver really good topics of conversation, discussing everything across the gamut, whether it be sports, music, culture, entertainment, politics, you name it, that we've got it. So go to www.19mediagroup.com. Let's not waste any time with it. We always enjoy this time of the year. It's our coveted autopsy reports. We've got the Clippers, Wolves on the slab. So keep us locked here on the Baseline. Time to break it
I break it down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Lee Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. And this is our coveted autopsy report, where we discuss the teams that gets ousted. First on the slab, Shaw. We got to talk about them. Los Angeles Clippers. It's funny because even when we have a reason to talk about the Los Angeles Lakers, the Clippers just find a way to be at the forefront of conversations of disappointment. However, if you are a Clippers fan, through all of this level of disappointment, there has to be some small ray of sunshine, some kind of positive outlook regarding a team that finished fifth in the Western Conference, a team that obviously ran into a buzzsaw with the Phoenix Suns. Well, arguably, if they didn't get Kevin Durant, you may still, with Russell Westbrook, had an opportunity to get to the Western Conference semifinals. But no, that's not what happens with this team, Shaw. It's always focusing on, I guess you could say, the clown show, the okey doke, you know what I'm saying, syndrome that seems to just kind of follow this team, that we can't take them seriously, that they're always an accident waiting to happen. They can't get out of their own way. And so that's what's disheartening, because I'm sure if you're Tyronn Lue and you've been coaching for as long as you've been coaching, you've been doing what you've been doing, you just want it to mean something for this team, this organization, especially for the type of year that they've had, despite getting knocked out of the first round.
Your statement there, accident waiting to happen. If that's not the Clippers tagline, I don't know what is. At this point, it's nothing but saltiness I have. I feel bad in some ways for Steve Ballmer. You can say, yeah, he's a little out there and eccentric and things of that nature. Let me just, what I like to do here when we talk about the autopsy. We're going to start with the numbers first. $201 million in committed salary next year for the Clippers. 201. No options. Just 201. Ballmer has to pay out. And that's without Russ. And that's without Plumlee, who they also acquired in trade and who was pretty decent for them in that too. So bump that number up another $20 to $30 million at least if you're going to try to retain those guys. The law, or Murphy's Law, always says it's like, when we least expect it to happen, that's what will happen. And maybe I think for the Clippers, that's what they're hoping. We're all going to count them out next year. We're all going to say, yeah, whatever. They look good on paper. So what? Be healthy, and then we'll prove it. And maybe next year is the year that it will happen. But at this point, it has nothing to do with X's and O's. It has nothing to do with, what they do from an offensive and defensive rating standpoint or whatever the case to be. This is sheerly about their guys being able to stay healthy and be on the floor. And bad luck, load management, whatever. It's all this convoluted gumbo of shit, really, for the Clippers that just can't allow them to be successful. And nobody is going to believe in them in any capacity. And I do think Stephen A went hard and said the Clippers should have forced Kawhi to retire and all kind of like wild stuff like that at the end of the day. If Kawhi retired, I also would not be surprised. But the Clippers forcing him to do so, I think, is just pretty much ridiculous statement. But to me, the Clippers are almost not worth autopsying in the aspect of it has nothing to do with anything that they can really control.
They're not worth the autopsy because they've died so many times in the course of the regular season.
It's the same story. Like, how do you die the same death every single year?
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the exact same way with other teams. It's like, okay, well, this happened or that happened or whatever. It's always Kawhi and PG weren't healthy. And at this point, it's just a broken record that nobody even really cares about at this point, other than the Clippers themselves.
Yeah. It's sad because you can kind of blame the climate of the NBA, saying, in order to win, you need at least two superstars. Shaw, how I've been about this, right? Franchises that make a decision to provide an identity to themselves have to understand that the only way that you can mitigate the risk of this type of investment with players is making sure that you have foundational players that you can lean on when those guys go out. So what I mean by that is, you look at the Boston Celtics. They've drafted Tatum, Brown, Smart, right? And role players. And while they're leaning on these stars, to come up and be stars, they went and they did free agency moves, right? Didn't they get Kyrie Irving? What happened there, right? Did they not make other certain moves? They couldn't keep Hal Horford. He leaves. Guess who comes back to Boston? But what's still standing there are their foundational players. And they've been fortunate enough, right? Like, yes, they lottery. I'm not using that as the straight and narrow example. What I'm saying is that the Los Angeles Clippers have never shown a propensity to draft well or to make sure that they keep their foundational pieces so that when they go out in free agency and they make this big splash, that everything rests on that one said player or this one particular move. Because then by this showing you that if the guy's not healthy or the guy's not committed or something goes on, you have got nothing, right? You've got nothing. All of that money, Shaw, are all invested in guys who are coming from different places, but none of them truly have been a part of or embrace the Los Angeles Clippers, right? And so that to me is the fear. And I feel bad because Ballmer is doing everything in his power to put together a successful winning basketball culture, not just a team, man, culture. And a lot of these guys don't have the same kind of mentality or are approaching it much differently than what the money is dictating and the frustrations that I think people are seeing from this team. Let's put it like this, Shaw. If we strip the disappointment of this season, wasn't it during this iteration of Tyronn Lue that he finally got the Los Angeles Clippers to the Western Conference Finals? Right? Wasn't there that opportunity when Doc Rivers was the head coach and they had Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan? You know what I'm saying? And it's just interesting to me, Shaw, that those three pieces, Chris Paul was the journeyman. Blake Griffin was their homegrown talent, and DeAndre Jordan as well, right? And none of these pieces are there anymore. But again, for that team to still be somewhat successful, they held on to Griffin. They held on, and all of a sudden you abandon those rules. You decide we're going to go in a completely different direction with this. It's all about Kawhi and it's all about George. And now if this doesn't pan out, it doesn't matter if Leonard or George leaves, but if this doesn't pan out, what are you resting this team's future on? What foundational piece are you actually saying there's going to be some sort of hope that this team is going to be able to hang with the Pacific Division, let alone the Western Conference? Nothing. It's crazy to me, Shaw. It's absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah, I think they're in a situation now where, again, that number is going to jump from 201. I almost feel like they kind of have to bring Russ back. I don't know what that number is going to be. Is it 3 years 60 type of thing? I don't know. And then what do you bring Plumlee back at as well too? All those guys are 30 plus years old, as are Kawhi and PG. The thing here, and I don't want to make this to become a repetitive theme, but I honestly don't see another path for them. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have player options in 24-25. And I think obviously next year they're all under contract. They could maybe Eric Gordon's number is not fully guaranteed, but everybody else is under contract. So this is your team, and you've made so many moves in terms of to get Kawhi there and NPG there. You don't have a whole lot of draft equity now, and all the moves they even made this past season and getting rid of Kennard and then bringing in Bones Highland and so forth and so like it's just a lot of things coming in and out. So there's not a clear path to roster construction from the draft or even free agency because of the cap that they're already kind of at right now. So it is, hey, let's see if we can load. Let's do it. Let's gear up and do it one more time. Can we load manage our way into whatever seed? And then hopefully, fingers crossed, bubble gum and tape, keep these guys pieced up together so that next year's playoff run can be better than what we've seen. And again, as I said in the outset, none of us believe that's going to happen, but they don't have a lot of choices here right now. And maybe they can move some of these supplemental pieces, Marcus Morris and Robert Covington and guys like that, but nothing that's going to make their team substantively better, because Paul George and Kawhi are the guys. And one more year is the way that this thing probably goes. And I think however it ends next year, 24-25 is a year that both of those guys probably opt out, depending on where they're at, obviously, in their career. And maybe they say, you know what, this LA situation didn't work out for us one way or the other. But I think next year we're going to see this exact same team with minor changes.
Okay, so let me try to put this as delicately as I could possibly put this. I agree with you. When I look at this roster, though, Shaw, this roster is so heavily uneven, right? In other words, what I'm saying is that there is so much dependency on Kawhi Leonard and Paul George that I don't think that they have enough versatility so that if and when these guys do get injured, there's anyone there to really kind of step in with any identity to supplement or do. I mean, and listen, that's the uniqueness and the greatness of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, right? They arguably were one of the two best two-way players that, you know, our generation is had, you know, between him, George, and Klay Thompson. They ushered in the era of the two-way player and its importance in this NBA, right? But we can also have seen as well, too, that because of the extensiveness of using these guys the way that we've used them, that their body has broken down, and they also recognize that they are going to be the forefront of load management when you have so much committed salary in these guys, right? So part of that, to me, Shaw, speaks more to the fact that you have to balance this team out in some way, shape, or form to give yourself the ability to say, we're going to load manage, right? Throughout the year, we're going to load manage. And they should be justified in so, because it's clear neither one of these guys are capable of finishing 60% of their NBA season. It's just not going to happen. Even if you say best case scenario, they are 100% healthy, the Clippers won't even allow that to happen. So I don't know what they're going to do, Shaw. I genuinely don't know what they're going to do. What I can say, though, is this, and I was going to ask you this question about this. You decide to bring back Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook, to me, still looks like a guy that wants to get out and run. I don't think he wants to be the guy that has to sit there in a half-court set and always have to figure out and look for the shot. He may want to, distribute and find guys. But doesn't that counter what you really want to see from George and Leonard? Has not their play transitioned to a more half-court oriented style offense? And is that what Tyronn Lue is going to have to work with, even if you do decide to bring back Russell Westbrook, in being able to implement Westbrook's style of play to complement George and Leonard?
It's about that point, and I think, in the regular season, that can be answered very simply by kind of staggering some of those minutes. You have one of those three, or definitely, or two of those three kind of out there, maybe not all three. So Russ can't get it and go, off a rebound and go up there and try to push at times. But then when you're running half court offense, maybe he's not the guy who's facilitating. They just didn't get a lot of overlap, I think, with all three of them the course of the season, especially Russ came so late as he did. I think what it comes down to, though, for next year is one of PG and Kawhi have to be there. I think there's actually enough talent-wise with Norman Powell in whatever role. Norman Powell seems to be able to handle a increased offensive role if you need him to.
He needs to be the starter. And I was going to actually throw this out at you, Shaw, as a question. Let me throw this out because you're getting right into this point I wanted to ask you. Would you be opposed to seeing Paul George or Kawhi Leonard coming off the bench?
I don't see a world where that happens.
I understand. I'm just saying, would you be opposed to that?
I think Norman Powell is still better suited as a guy coming off the bench. It doesn't help them in any capacity in terms of their load management, whether they start or come off the bench. It's going to be about how they finish. So I don't know what it does to the roster in terms of the starting rotation to a degree. If you're really squinting to see it, it probably benefits Russ more than anything else. And I don't know if you want to do that based on Russ is actually being available, or versus all right, what the talent on the roster actually indicates and dictates. Like, because you're more than likely you're gonna cater to Paul George and Kawhi for the most part. But I think one of those guys coming off the bench probably caters to Russ if he continues to be your starter. Norman Powell can oscillate either way. I think he's good. It doesn't matter whether he starts or comes off the bench. And I think PG and Kawhi are just obviously too proud and too good for that to really be their true lives, I think, at this point. But it's an interesting situation. But you're not going to cater your team to kind of go around Russell Westbrook, I think, at this stage of his career either. But
yeah, but I don't think it's a question of catering. I think to me it's a question of dynamic, right? And again, who do you have? And maybe this was going to make it an interesting, dilemma, so to speak, for Tyronn Lue to take into consideration once he has, a full grasp of what this roster is going to look like. To your point, there's not going to be a whole lot of movement being made. So I'm sure that Tyronn Lue is already going to be looking at some of the guys who are already ready available and implementing some kind of plan to say, I need you guys to be here when we come back, to training camp. I need you guys to be here with your game. I need you to be here with your game. That's probably the one good thing that we can say, because typically when you see a lot of transactions happening in the off season, most head coaches really can't do a whole lot except for who they know is obviously there. And the tweaking really begins when these guys are all collectively together, or maybe they have some, off training, camps or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But it's to me, the one good thing that you can say about this is that Lue has an opportunity to really evaluate and talk. To me, Shaw, it's not the stars, because they're either going to be there or not. It's the role players, and really trying to figure out how deep I can truly go with what I need to do if and when that situation occurs again, where in case of emergency, break glass. Because that's what's going to happen with this team. No question.
Well, again, what I was saying earlier is I think you need one of PG and Kawhi to be healthy. And then with Powell and Russ, you have a chance. I mean, not necessarily not a title contending chance, but you have a chance to maybe do something in the playoffs with the supplemental parts. The auxiliary guys who could probably go are Covington and Marcus Morris. But what is the return if you were to trade them? Like, you're not getting a first round, even late first rounders for either one of those guys.
Sure, like even you would say, yes, move them. And all I'm just saying is that, man, even if you cannot move them, if there's nothing else there, they cannot be guys that are just taking up space on the bench and not giving you anything. Like, if Covington is really there to be a defender, then he's got to be a better defender. He can't be a liability. If that's his calling card, then be better at that, right? Nicholas Batum, right? Like, there has to be in other words, I think what I'm saying, Shaw, is that Tyronn Lue cannot afford to solely depend on, well, if my guys are healthy. That is so far from this anymore. You have got to figure out a way to work with the other guys out there and make sure that they are an intricate part in however capacity you use them, because they got to be out on the floor. You can't just let them sit there on the bench. Unfortunately, the injuries to your star players don't give you the flexibility of thinking that can happen. You get what I'm saying? Most other coaches can basically sit there and say, I'll use a 9-man lineup, because they have confidence that their guys stay healthy, they're on the floor, and I can go through those stretches. Tyronn Lue don't have that luxury. If he's not playing any of these guys, you can't then suddenly expect them, even if they get into the playoffs, that they're suddenly going to start contributing. You've pretty much frozen them for the rest of the year. So you either get rid of them, or you really got to put emphasis on the fact that if there's no flexibility, and this is what you got to work with, these guys have got to step up and be better. They just do. And age may catch up with them, whatever, but they're on the roster. They're on the bench. You got to use them. He has to go with a different mentality, I guess is what I'm saying, in utilizing that roster to the fullest. He is one of the few people that, using the full 14, he's got to use them all, because they all are going to have to contribute in some capacity to supplement what they're not going to be able to get through the course of the season with their star players.
Yeah, I'll close by this. I think it's hard for Lue to do that, because it's one thing. Let's take Marcus Morris, for instance. Mm-hmm. So he's going to get 28 minutes tonight because Paul George is out. Well, Paul George is back tomorrow, so now Marcus Morris gets 12 minutes. And so the oscillating of those auxiliary parts becomes they hard for them to kind of get into the rhythm. I understand like the experience. If there were younger guys, like, hey, the minutes are the minutes and the experience is important, but these are mostly veteran guys. We sat here on our award show and gave the Clippers, or at least I did, hey, they're the deepest team in the league because they have the most amount of known guys and the most amount of capable known guys that are coming off their bench. But all those guys need to be in some semblance of a rhythm. And because of the load management that is going to continue with this team, like, let's not fool ourselves here. It puts those people and those players in a very precarious situation because you're getting 30 minutes one night, you're getting 10 minutes the next night. And how do you build a rhythm throughout the course of the season with that? And supposed to just like, yeah, I want to stay ready. I think it's hard. I look at that roster. There's 12 guys who should probably play, including Bones Highland and Terrence Mann, so if you bring back Russ and you bring back Plumlee, nobody's really running a 12-man rotation out there. This isn't college. So this is going to be tough for the Clippers to oscillate and to figure out here. But for me, hey, let's see what they do next year. And, I'll be waiting for the injuries to happen before, I put any real money on this Clippers team.
You're already amputating them before they even step out.
Why would you not? Why would you believe anything else different would happen at this point?
I'm not disagreeing with you, but it sucks. It really does suck. And listen, I feel bad for Clippers fans, man. A lot of you guys are so fixated on all of these, faux pas rivalries and things of that nature. And it's like, man, your team has got to be present and accounted for before you even worry about those things. And that's what I'm hoping for more than anything. I mean, listen, the Clippers have been a great find for the NBA as far as a competitive nature, because they speak to something that doesn't get talked about, which is the willingness to find a way to still compete and not let injuries become the excuse. But there does come a point from an organization perspective, from a fan perspective, and even from a player perspective, that it just doesn't become sustainable anymore when you just don't have able bodies out there competing, right? When you're basically working with a mash unit on a night in, night out basis. Like there just comes a point where something has got to give on that. And I'm just hoping that they figure that out a lot sooner than later before it really sets this organization back further than even. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this is our coveted Autopsy reports. Coming up, we're going to be focusing our attention on the Minnesota Timberwolves. But before we do, we got to make sure that we put in the proper plug. So, are you tired of placing bets alone, not having anyone to talk about regarding your predictions of the bets that you place? You want to connect with other sports bettors and share your winning strategies? Look no further than with the SHARPZ app. This is the social network for sports bettors. With SHARPZ, you can connect with your friends, see what they're betting on, and even interact with their bets. The iOS app allows you to connect all major sports books and daily fantasy platforms like DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, PrizePicks, and Underdog. The best part, if you download the SHARPZ app now, even as we speak, you should be downloading it, right? Don't just be listening to me. Actually get on your phone and be downloading. Use the promo code THEB, like in Bravo, 286, and you'll receive access to our community, and you'll start showing off your betting chops with the opportunity to compare your bets with us. So be sure to go to THEB286, put that promo code in after you've downloaded the SHARPZ app, and start connecting with other sports bettors. Don't forget to share your winning strategies and interact with other users. Join the social network for sports bettors and take your betting game to the next level. Download the SHARPZ app today. Coming up, Shaw and I discuss Minnesota Timberwolves here on The Baseline. We are back. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and we are talking autopsy reports. Shaw and I on the White Jackets. So as we continue to keep the conversation going, the next team that we're putting on the slab is going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves. Shaw, Minnesota Timberwolves, man, they're a team that wants to be among one of those elites, but their record and their inconsistency of gameplay lends us to continue to think differently, right? Only 2 games above 500, coming in as the 8th seed. I I don't know, man. Do you buy or sell on the Minnesota Timberwolves?
There's a lot of selling going on here, but there's a caveat to where the Timberwolves season went, right? Cat only played 29 games. So that is obviously not what they expected. And while the Gobert pairing alongside Cat wasn't all that great either, they need Cat to play, more than 29 games for the season to have a true indication of how everything was supposed to work out. I think one thing is clear after the playoffs: Anthony Edwards is and needs to be that guy. We've been saying that now for a couple of seasons, and Cat actually needs to be kind of the ancillary guy and the backup, the Robin to Anthony Edwards Batman. And then Gobert and Conley. I think the Conley move was really astute of them. But my biggest question, I think, for the Timberwolves is not necessarily how they figure out that starting rotation, but the complementary pieces of like Naz Reid, who was so immense for them, and then he got hurt. Are they going to be able to retain him? Because I think it's going to be a lot of interest out there in that guy, a lot of interest. And if they do retain him, that probably comes at the detriment of Gobert, because there's times this year where Reed looked a lot better, at least in terms of the pairing alongside the rest of those guys, than Gobert did. So for me, that's where some of these bigger questions lie with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But they just definitely need to have Cat and Edwards together in a 60 to 70 game sample size to have any type of real wiggle and shake in the Western Conference moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, this is all about Anthony Edwards. It's, one thing I can honestly give you, Shaw, is that Anthony Edwards is a man of his word. He said that his emphasis is that he wanted to be a better player defensively. He eventually wants to be Defensive Player of the Year. He wants to be among one of the best players in the NBA, and he is continually taking those strides to get there. I think what partly sucks is whether or not the organization is reading this properly enough so that the players that Anthony Edwards are surrounded by are giving him the opportunities and the chance for him to continue to do those things. He's young, so I think part of this is going to be like that growth process. But a lot of it, again, I think it's more organizational than anything. If they do retain a guy like Naz Reid, that's fine. But then this is on Finch to figure out a way for both Gobert and Reid to, in concert, really help bolster that front court. I to your point, Cat being gone for 29 games definitely was a blow to them. And while this team, looked a little bit better defensively than last year, I still think that part of that is that this team has holes from a defensive perspective that, maybe their offense can make up for at times, but certainly there's just not enough consistency there to buy into it. It'll be interesting to see what takes place here, but I agree with you that, like, I think part of what needs to happen here is making sure Pat stays healthy, but more importantly, they really have to figure out how to shore up a lot of those supplemental pieces around the star players that they have in order for those minutes to be meaningful when they come off, when they go to the bench, that the Minnesota Timberwolves can be, a viable basketball team, what I'm saying, on a night in, night out basis.
Yeah, so they're better defensively. They've been really pretty good defensively the last 2 years. Actually, it's the offense that's really struggling, and they turn the ball over a lot. And I don't know how much you want to put on D'Angelo Russell, from when he was there. He was averaging 2.7 turnovers. And Conley is a guy who's traditionally not a high turnover guy, so that will help somewhat. But they turn the ball over a lot, and they foul a lot as well too. They're consistently putting people on the line, even with one of the better rated defense. So if you're a good defense, you're probably more physical anyway. And then you're more susceptible to fouling. But some of those things I think they can kind of turn down and get better at internally without a whole lot of effort defense. In terms of scheme, and that's just kind of changing the way that they contest and do some of those things effort wise.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, to me, Shaw, and again, the numbers will always speak to certain things that we say. All right, they're good, they're bad, whatever. But that, to your point, the fact that this is a team that has a propensity to foul, right? Meaning they're giving free points to the opposing team. And more importantly, their players are not on the floor in available clutch or quote unquote important minutes, right? This has been the same problem with Cat. It's the same problem with Rudy Gobert. So, and again, an adjustment is going to have to be, and you can also make the argument Anthony Edwards is susceptible to this. These are your star players. These are your cornerstone players. they've got to be on the floor. So there has to be some kind of influence, approach, or a schematic change that allows them to be able to stay on that court much longer so that what they give you, whether it's offensively or defensively, has meaning to it. That's all that I'm saying. I'm not saying that they're a bad defensive team, but I'm saying that the timeliness of how their star players are not able to perform, whether it's because they have to come off, they have to go to the bench, or because they can't execute because defensively they're allowing other teams to get through them because they're carrying 3-4 fouls. This team has had a propensity of allowing that to happen way too many times over, and it stymies what you could potentially see from them offensively. So that, and I think part of that as well too is making sure that you can bring in role players, where if you want guys like Cat and guys like Anthony Edwards, and I don't want to say Gobert, I think he's a risk taker at times, but not nearly as much with his propensity to block shots and things of that nature. But with Cat and with Edwards, they are risk takers. They're going to have a high, foul volume in through the course of a game. If you want that to be the case, you got to have guys that are going to come off the bench and really help be able to be supplemental and maintain some consistency out there for Finch to say, I can leave them off, take them off the floor for like 8-7 minutes. They can't afford to do that if their guys are not going to come in and be able to sustain either scoring or sustain their defensive abilities.
I mean that's a game, right? Can you figure out a ways to counteract your negative aspects, when some of your stars go out, and not take too much of a hit. A lot of times people skew one way or the other. They're too defensive minded, they're too offensive minded. Getting that median aspect or building a rotation and a second unit that complements your is the key to that too. So Jaden McDaniels is a guy who probably starts for them, and then is still working on his offense, but is a high level defender. Conversely, Naz Reid is a high level offensive guy who probably needs to figure out more chops defensively if they're able to retain him. The Timberwolves team, I think, again, they're not as bad as I think as the record showed, because while I understand the distaste a lot of people have for Cat, I get it, and I can understand it in a very, very poignant way. I'm also not at the same mindset of like, okay, where he's not valuable at all to what they do. And you can't tell me if he plays even 30 more games. He played 29 total games this year. He plays 30 more games. That doesn't have at least a 10 win difference from where they were. I think they really could have been, a 45 to even 50 win team had he been healthy the entire year. And maybe that's foolish to say, I don't know, especially for the people out there who really don't like him specifically, but they didn't get a real fair shake at it, but they also didn't do themselves any favors. And this is a year where they can kind of look internally, figure out some role definement here, obviously. And then I think retain guys like Naz Reid and figure out a more defined role for McDaniels even moving forward. And then I think they'll be all right. And maybe we can see the true Minnesota Timberwolves this upcoming season.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as our coveted Autopsy reports. Conversation is on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Coming up, Shaw and I are going to give our coveted eulogies discussing the Minnesota Timberwolves. And there's an interesting question that I want to ask Shaw based off of his assessment of Karl-Anthony Towns. You want to miss out on what I'm going to throw at his way. He's probably got his eyebrows up like The Rock right now saying, what the hell are you about to ask me? You'll find out here on the Baseline. Be sure to check us out. And if you are catching the NBA playoffs, make sure that you're dipped out in fashionable wear that's got you ready to rock and ready to support your teams. Be sure to go to the NBA store /Fanatics for you to get the greatest high quality, authentic basketball gear so that you can show your love and support. Jerseys, hats, accessories. The NBA store has everything you need to show off your team pride. Exclusive and limited edition items can make your collection truly one of a kind. Don't miss out. And also know too that the NBA store is online, so you can shop from anywhere in the world. So be sure to go to the NBA store, click on our affiliate link, nbastore.vwz is in zebra 6.net/baseline. And by doing that, not only will you be copying some of the flyest NBA gear, but you'll also be showing your love and support for the Baseline. So be sure to go to the NBA store /Fanatics. Again, nbastore.vwz6.net/baseline. And be sure to cop that gear. Show your love and support for us, obviously, by utilizing that link. you will be supporting our patronage as well too. And as always, we love you and we thank you for your support. We'll talk more about the Minnesota Timberwolves here on the Baseline. We are back. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and we are focusing our attention on the Minnesota Timberwolves and our coveted autopsy reports. So, Shaw, the question that I have for you is this. Mike Conley obviously was an intelligent choice to come in and really round things out for the Timberwolves in many respects, really help improve Rudy Gobert, because they were about to hang his ass. But my question to you is Mike Conley the right point guard for this team moving forward? And the reason why I asked this question is there may be an opportunity here, right? You may have an opportunity for Anthony Edwards. While I think he's a great dominant point guard, he's also a guy that likes to have the ball in his hands, and he also likes to play in an isolation style type of way. I think Finch has allowed that to happen, quite often through the course of this year. Is it out the realm of possibility that he could transition to being more of a guard, so to speak, and because he's going to have the ball in his hands more? When it comes to having a guy like Mike Conley, who you would think have the ball more in his hands, but he isn't as transitional as I think the Timberwolves need to be with their youth and their athleticism. So that's the reason I'm kind of curious on how long do you continue to go with this combination if you're Finch?
Yeah, I think Conley's fine for where they are right now. He was an upgrade from D'Angelo Russell, who is
I'm not saying that he wasn't. No, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that when you terms of the ball dominance, so Conley is not a super high usage guy. He knows how to get guys at the spots, but not and pick his own spots where necessarily where I think Russell might have struggled with that. I wouldn't want Anthony Edwards having to run and initiate offense on a regular basis. I think you get a guy like Conley who can table set for him in a way that gets him to some of his spots, whether it is even if it is to create some level of isolation at some point. That's probably the better move. And Conley only has, next year will be the final year of his deal. And you can make some hard decisions whether or not Conley will be 36, after next season. And do you figure out a way to get some semblance of an upgrade or just move off of him altogether or bring him back? As again, I don't think Conley's gotten past a lot of his injury issues, at least, knock on wood. And I think again, he's just low maintenance and probably what they need for this team that has some growing up and maturity that needs to kind of permeate throughout their locker room. That includes Cat as well too, who wants to be a leader, who just kind of hasn't materialized for him yet. So I like Conley being there for a multitude of reasons, but a lot of them start with the actual basketball, which would keep Edwards, off ball and allowing him to kind of develop that way as a high efficient scorer in this NBA.
We always come to this question when you talk about Karl-Anthony Towns. Do you view Towns as a 1B or 2A type player?
Yeah, I think the stats will tell you that he's 1B, but I think in terms of the locker room and aspect, I think he's probably more of a 2. And we talked about the Clippers on the earlier segment, and Paul George, said on the podcast recently, he's like, "Hey, I realized that I needed to be a number 2," and that's humbling. Some people are going to poke fun at that, but there's nothing wrong with understanding hey, who you are and what your actual makeup is. I don't think Cat has come to that realization as of yet. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't strive to be better. I mean, we all should be trying to do that. But I think as currently constructed, if you're looking at taking it from the eye test, Edwards seems to be the guy who can really truly command the locker room and command the court in a way that Cat doesn't. And while Cat's numbers are always going to be impressive, there's something that's just a little bit missing when it comes to the galvanization of the rest of the team and the roster around that. So that's where I stand on it. Cat's not destitute. Cat's not as bad as a lot of people try to make him out to be, but I don't think he's the 1A build your team around type guy. But I think they have the other guy there. And it's just a matter of having that role definement kind of be more clearly constructed for both of them as this franchise pushes forward here in the coming seasons.
Well, I like how you put that, because I think part of that is when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, about what do you do with Karl-Anthony Towns if what he's doing is not affluent to what you're getting from Anthony Edwards, right? Like, so Karl-Anthony Towns averages like 20 points per game, right? What does that actually mean in the grand scheme of things? You know what I'm saying, Shaw? Like, to me, like, what's interesting is that Karl-Anthony Towns came into the NBA as being this offensively potentially gifted player. And there's nothing that doesn't say that. But there's nothing other than the injuries that's jumping out at me saying he can do this and he can consistently do it throughout. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you kind of look through his, you know, the years that he's played, he has highs and he's got a lot of lows where he just disappears from games. Part of it was, okay, he didn't have that 1A player next to him or 1B player. All right, he's had Anthony Edwards next to him a few times.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing Anthony Edwards taking leaps and bounds of elevating himself, not just as potentially one of the most offensively explosive players in the game of basketball, but also being one of the more dynamic leaders in the game of basketball at age 21. And so what I'm just saying is that, like, even if we wanted to backtrack a little bit and put Karl-Anthony Towns in a specific space of this is going to give him the opportunity for him to grow, I'm just curious of what that growth is supposed to look like. Is it him going back to being that offensively gifted basketball player that everyone says that he is, which part of that means as well at his position, not only should his game flourish for his ability to shoot the basketball, but his game is his ability to play that 4 position, to be able to have mid-range and be able to post and take. He doesn't really do all of that, you know, and I don't know if it's because of injury. I don't know if it's just preference of style of play. All I'm just saying is that, like, it's hard to define now what Karl-Anthony Towns offensively is going to be able to give you, just simply because we're starting to see, you know, a little bit of, I want to say, inconsistency again in the definition of what he's going to bring to the table for a team that really, from a talent perspective, should be a middle ground team at the very least, as floor level. That's what this team is. But to your point, the 29 games robbed us of being able to say if whether or not that's true or false in that belief, with the elevation of what Edwards had given you this year and moving Russell and bringing in a comparable point guard to allow us to be able to make that assessment about whether or not Gobert, Edwards, and Towns are a good trifecta for this team and the organization.
Yeah, I'll just close by saying this. Towns has the ability to live on the perimeter, obviously, in the minutes where Gobert is out there. I think he should flip-flop in the minutes if they keep Naz Reid, where now he becomes the guy who goes down to the block and let Naz Reid be the shooter from the perimeter. I think it's ridiculous to maybe have them both doing that at the same time. So I think if you stagger the minutes in the rotation, that allows Towns to get the requisite post touches that I think can keep him efficient and kind of keep him in a mode that makes sense for the Timberwolves holistically. And then he can venture back out there to the perimeter when Gobert's there, you know, in those minutes together. But he tends to want to just be perimeter based with very, 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 very few paint touches and post ups. And I think that does the Timberwolves a disservice, especially when they're trying to hunt for ways to get easy offense. So we'll see if they make some of those changes going into next season.
All right. Well, to your point, Shaw, I mean, you hope that what we're burying is the bad habits of the Minnesota Timberwolves. If there's any ability for them to take an elevated, you know what I'm saying, to put themselves in an elevated space, take that next level up, so to speak. I would hate to think that what they gave us last year and this year is really the ceiling for this team as far as the composition of what this team potentially is going to be able to do. I still think there's opportunity for them to improve, especially with the down year that with the Memphis Grizzlies, and, you know, with some of these other teams that we are thinking are supposed to be in the throes of things. But part of it as well, too, is whether or not it's sustainable for this Minnesota Timberwolves team, you know? So
hopefully both of these teams, Clippers and Wolves, will be better than they've shown. I think the Wolves probably have more ceiling and more faith in terms of just by hopefully being healthy. But these are two really proud teams and franchises that should be better than they showed here in the Western Conference going into next season for sure. All
right. Well said, brother. Well said. Great show again on the docket this week, man. I once again always appreciate the fact that you can help me, you know what I'm saying, examine the dead with brutal efficiency and effectiveness.
That's how we do here on the baseline. So we'll see who's next up. The winner, or the loser rather, the Kings and Warriors series will definitely be up there, and then those shit talking Memphis Grizzlies, the last team from the first round.
Somebody tell me, yeah, like you amped up, ready to talk about them, man. I mean, personally, I'm just be like, Denny Green. They are who we thought they were. That's it.
Well, sometimes that's a shame. So
that is. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Kali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. Catch up with you next time.